Thanks for tuning into this podcast. If you appreciate the news that Rebel brings you, consider being a part of what makes it possible. You can do so by subscribing to our exclusive content at rebelnewsplus.com. That means get exclusive shows, documentary, behind the scenes, and more. And it's for a cheap price as low as $8 to start. We appreciate your support.
Hello, my friends. I want to show you two crazy stories from Europe, and they're a warning of what could happen here. I want to show you a video of the newest, most modern, cleanest coal-fired power plant in Germany being detonated on purpose. And I would tell you about the last steel mill in the UK shutting down. What's the commonality and what does it mean for us here? I'll tell you. Oh, by the way, it involves Mark Carney. But first, let me invite you to become a subscriber to Rebel News Plus. That's the video version of this podcast. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com, click subscribe. It's $8 a month. You get great video content and the satisfaction of keeping Rebel News strong. Oh, by the way, one more thing.
Hey there, Rebel News listeners. Do you have a business or cause that you want to promote to the tens of thousands of regular Rebel News viewers? Now's your chance. Whether it's ads on podcasts like this one, videos, our website, or even our digital billboard truck, Rebel News has your advertising needs covered. It's easy to get started. Just head over to rebelnews.com/advertise. That's rebelnews.com/advertise. Fill out our form and find out how Rebel News can help spread your message today. Don't wait. Advertise with Rebel News. Reach freedom-loving patriots and support our independent journalism.
You're listening to a Rebel News podcast.
Tonight, Europe talks about rearming itself, but it's actually deindustrializing. Can it really do both? It's March 27th, and this is the Ezra Levant Show.
Shame on you, you censorious thug.
Twitter, or X as it's now called, is my hobby, and I'm on it way too much, but it's endlessly interesting. That's why I saw this video on it. Take a quick look.
Milliarden Euros an Steuergeldern für Bau, anschließendem Abriss und Neubau von Anlagen zur Gewinnung von Strom. Im Jahre 2015 wurde im Hamburger Süden das Kohlekraftwerk Moorburg durch Vattenfall in Betrieb genommen. Es galt zu seiner Zeit als eine der größten Stromproduzenten in Deutschland und produzierte im Jahr mehrere Terawattstunden Strom. Im Jahr 2020 nahm Vattenfall an einem Ausschreiben.
Anyhow, I read the original tweet and I translated it into English and I did some more research and it is true. It's a crazy story. Germany just destroyed its most modern, clean, coal-fired power plant. It was just 6 years old. They spent 3 billion euros on it. Here's what I wrote in my tweet. Germany detonates its most modern coal-fired power plant after just 6 years. The Moorburg plant in Hamburg cost 3 billion euros and produced 1,654 megawatts, enough to power the entire city. They demolished it because Greta said so. Putin and she are laughing. Now, I have no idea why, but that tweet seemed to capture people's attention in some way, and it has been seen 4.5 million times and counting. I'm actually really shocked. I just did it as a throwaway comment because it was so weird to see a modern factory be detonated. And really, there was no criticism. There was no rebuttal to it. The main criticism I'm seeing actually to my tweet is people saying, Germany didn't do this because Greta told, well, obviously not literally. Greta doesn't command the German government. I mean, that Greta Thunberg and the rest of the climate cult that's very active in Germany, including the Green Party, they made this politically possible. They made it politically necessary to waste a 3 billion euro power plant and replace it with something green that I promise you will not work, or at the very least won't work affordably. And my last point about Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping laughing, well, That's exactly what they're doing, because how can you remilitarize your country if you're deindustrializing it? And here's what I'm talking about. What's this remilitarized business? Well, remember a few weeks ago, the Trump-Zelensky meeting in the Oval Office that went sideways? It shocked NATO and the European Union for a number of reasons. First of all, they hate Trump to begin with. They have full Trump derangement syndrome. I should tell you, Trump was actually very polite for the first half hour of that meeting. It was only when they were wrapping it up that Zelensky provoked a fight by sparring with J.D. Vance and audibly calling him a bitch in Ukrainian, which is crazy. Trump officials later confirmed that this was the third time Zelensky did something to avoid signing the deal. I don't know if you remember that.
President Trump sent me there to, again, we were supposed to bring the Ukrainian people closer to the U.S. people, send a strong signal to Russian leadership that they had not only shared values, but now shared economic interest, and also have a strong signal for the American people that their tax dollars were actually going to work. Instead, President Zelensky and I had a very tough 45-minute meeting at a very loud decibel level, and I kept telling him, Mr. President, the purpose of this is to show the Russians there is no daylight between us. And at the end of the meeting, he said, well, I'm not signing this. And I said, at the end of the meeting, I said to him, what do you want to go out and tell the press? I said, because I don't want to go out and show the Russians that there's daylight in between us. And he said, well, I'm going to go out and say I'll sign it in Munich. Then he got to Munich and he ran into Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio, very different than Vice President Harris and Secretary Blinken, but he didn't sign the agreement. So finally, we were supposed to have the signing today. It was supposed to be a great day, and this is one of the biggest own goals in diplomatic history.
But of course, it was still shocking because it was so different from how Joe Biden had been for the previous 4 years. And because, of course, critics see Trump as nefarious as possible. He's never making decisions in good faith. There's always some scheme. That's what Europe thinks. I think Trump just wants to end the war. I mean, that's what he's been saying relentlessly. And I think he wants NATO to rearm itself and pay for itself. And that's nothing new. I mean, I don't know if you remember this video of Trump scolding NATO in his first term for not paying his fair share. Remember this clip?
I have been very, very direct with Secretary Stoltenberg and members of the alliance in saying that NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations. But 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States. And many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and not paying in those past years. Over the last 8 years, the United States spent more on defense than all other NATO countries combined. If all NATO members had spent just 2% of their GDP on defense last year, we would have had another $119 billion for our collective defense and for the financing of additional NATO reserves.
I mean, that was when one of the few meetings that Donald Trump had with Justin Trudeau. He was scolding Trudeau over not paying its fair share and Canada not paying the fair share and Trudeau fibbing about it. Remember that?
Well, we'll put them on a payment plan, We'll put Canada on a payment plan, right? I'm sure the Prime Minister would love that. What are you at? What is your number?
The number we talk about is 70% increase over these past years, including, and for the coming years, including significant investments in our fighter jets, significant investments in our naval fleets. We are increasing significantly our defense spending from previous governments that cut it.
Okay. Where are you now in terms of your number?
1/4. And continuing to move
They're
forward.
getting there. They know it's important to do that. And their economy is doing well.
they'll get there quickly.
Now, obviously, when it comes to Ukraine, I hope there is peace for both countries' population's sake. But Europe took this whole terrible meeting to mean that Trump is leaving NATO, that he's against NATO. I don't think so. I think Trump does want Europe to pay its way. It's true. And I think he wants every country to pay their way. And look, we don't like the tariff war that's happening at the same time. I don't like it. But if it's possible to see things from America's point of view, I think Trump is saying America is the most important market in the world. If you want access to our market, you give us equal access to yours. That's this whole reciprocal tariffs thing. America actually, I was surprised to learn this, has the lowest tariffs and non-tariff barriers of any major economy. As in, America is the most open to the world's imports. If you doubt me, tell me why you can't get a mortgage from an American bank in Canada, why you can't get an American cell phone carrier or contract, why you can't buy American chicken or cheese or milk or yogurt. This is what America First means. This is related in a way, and I'll explain how, to the recent revocation of visas of non-permanent residents or student visas from anti-American extremists. In recent weeks, pro-Hamas activists, particularly on campus, have been arrested and their visas seized, and they've been put on the path to deportation.
And I'll say it again, I said it everywhere. Let me be abundantly clear, okay? If you go apply for a visa right now, anywhere in the world, let me just send this message out. If you apply for a visa to enter the United States and be a student, and you tell us that the reason why you're coming to the United States is not just because you want to write op-eds, but because you want to participate in movements that are involved in doing things like vandalizing universities, harassing students, taking over buildings, creating a ruckus, we're not going to give you a visa. If you lie to us and get a visa and then enter the United States and with that visa participate in that sort of activity, we're going to take away your visa. And once you've lost your visa, you're no longer legally in the United States, and we have a right, like every country in the world has a right, to remove you from our country. So it's just that simple. I think it's crazy. I think it's stupid for any country in the world to welcome people into their country that are going to go to your universities as visitors. They're visitors. And say, I'm going to your universities to start a riot. I'm going to your universities to take over a library and harass people. I don't care what movement you're involved in. Why would any country in the world allow people to come and disrupt? Now, we gave you a visa to come and study and get a degree, not to become a social activist.
I think these are related because I think this is about, you're not going to like the word, I think this is about respect. I mean, why did the White House, in cooperation with the leadership of El Salvador, why did they put out this video of really, really hardened Latin American gang members being put on planes, shipped from America to El Salvador, having their heads shaved and put into prison? Do you see this video? Why would you put that video out there? Well, it's a deterrent to bad guys sneaking in your country, but I think it's also about self-respect. I think Americans love seeing these things, love hearing Trump talk this way after 4 years of being walked over under Joe Biden. Now, I hope that Canada can get through this because I don't want our country to be pushed around, but I think that's where it's coming from. I think Trump is reasserting respect and self-respect. And he's demanding both if you want access to his market or if you want military support. Back to that falling tower in Germany. You know, Germany has been one of the most pro-Ukraine and anti-Putin countries in Europe, and good for them. I mean, they have a historical loggerheads with Russia, but Germany is now talking about remilitarizing with huge sums of money. They're talking about it. They haven't done it yet. Now, anyone who has heard of World War I or World War II should be a little bit nervous about Germany rearming, but I do think it's a good thing. I think I've showed you this stat before. There are 50,000 U.S. soldiers in Germany right now at 40 American military bases, 40 U.S. bases in Germany. The war is over 80 years ago, and American soldiers have not left. They're still in Japan, too. They're still in Korea, too. They're still in Cuba from that war. I mean, it's incredible how how much money, blood, and treasure the Americans spend around the world. Why is the United States the globo-cop? It's a question Trump asks sometimes. Maybe America wants to be. Maybe America wants the whole world run in its image, and I think a lot of Americans like that. But then again, maybe Americans don't after so many forever wars. How many trillions of dollars spent in Iraq and Afghanistan, and for what? Hey, remember that guy Callum, the Brit we spoke to the other day who was arrested under the Terrorism Act and police grilled him for 6 hours? Remember him? I saw this video he posted the other day from Afghanistan. Just watch this for a minute.
So I found this big trash pile, all trash, things that Afghanis don't need. Loads of chairs, other crap, more chairs, some rugs they don't want. What else don't they want in Afghanistan? Gender sensitivity training. US aid Afghans value chains livestock gender and youth team. Oh no. Women's agriculture. Don't need that anymore. That's for the trash heap. More gender sensitivity training. Don't need that. God. Apparently when we landed, there was immediately a firefight between some ISIS guys and Taliban guys just down there. Taliban won.
Did you see that? American taxpayers' dollars was going towards gender analysis in Afghanistan. Obviously, the Taliban have thrown that all out. I mean, that's what American money has gone to around the world, and I think a lot of Americans are sick of it. Anyways, a reality check is usually a conservative thing. When people daydream, that's usually a liberal instinct, and you want to have dreams. You want to think big. I do. But reality is conservative. Will Canada actually be self-sufficient, as both the liberals and the conservatives tell us? Here's a tweet from Anita Anand. She says, yes, we will build an all-in Canada auto manufacturing sector powered by Canadian workers while using Canadian steel and aluminum. Canada strong. And she retweets a video from Mark Carney. Well, that's a tall order. It takes a lot of things to just build an auto industry. I mean, you have to be a pretty serious country to do that. Not all countries in the world have a car industry. For example, you have to be serious enough to use coal to make steel. I don't know if you know this, but you cannot make steel without coal. Nothing else burns hot enough. Did you know that? So all the steel in those big wind turbines, they cannot be made without coal. I'm reminded, though, of this bizarre, flippant comment by Mark Carney about steel.
Secondly, what we're going to do is make sure not that the government pays, not that we as taxpayers pay, but the large polluters pay. And so what happens...
But does that not ultimately trickle down?
No, because what the big companies are producing, by and large, are not products that we are consuming. There's some element of that, but by and large, a steel company, how much steel are you using these days, Todd? I mean, not as much we used.
Canadians don't need steel. He said that like 2 weeks ago. Mark Carney hates steel because he hates coal. And he hates oil and gas, and he hates all of carbon. It's his entire motive, GFANS, that we talked about yesterday, the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero. What would net zero in an industry actually look like? It would look a little bit like that detonated coal plant in Germany, wouldn't it? That's net zero. Remember what we saw yesterday about GFANS? He's been a net zero advisor to the United Kingdom government too. Remember he said that under oath? Well, would you look at this headline from the Daily Telegraph today? Today, there's no more British Steel. Now, British Steel is the name of a company. It actually hasn't been British for a while. It's owned by China. Imagine that. I mean, talk about the opposite of America first. The UK allowed China to buy its last steel company. Well, let me read to you a little bit from this Telegraph story. British Steel's Chinese owners, I just got to say that again. British Steel's Chinese owners reject £500 million of taxpayers' cash to go green. So the UK is offering them the equivalent of $1 billion Canadian to go green. How do you make a steel company green when, like I say, look it up yourself, you cannot make steel without coal? British Steel's Chinese owners reject £500 million of taxpayers' cash to go green. Future of UK's only virgin steel factory faces fresh doubts. Virgin steel is when you make steel from scratch as opposed to just melting down scrap metal. Let me read a little bit. The future of one of Britain's biggest steel makers has been thrown into doubt after its Chinese owner rejected £500 million from the government to help it switch to green energy. Jingye, the Chinese steel group, is understood to have told UK ministers that it will not accept the subsidy to invest in green production at its British steel operations in Scunthorpe. You want to say that carefully, because it falls short of the £1 billion demanded. The rejection raises fresh doubts about the future of this site, which employs thousands of workers. On Wednesday, Sarah Jones, the energy minister, told the Business Select Committee its offer to British Steel to keep its operations going had been rejected. Quote, "We made an offer to British Steel on Monday and they have rejected that offer. We are still in talks with them at the moment," she said. "Our preference would be for the blast furnaces to keep going for the time being," she told the committee. The Scunthorpe site is currently the only site in the UK that can make virgin steel using blast furnaces. The government has been pushing for producers to switch to greener electric furnace production, which mostly melts scrap steel or iron and mixes it with some virgin steel. The Scunthorpe plant's blast furnaces have been earmarked for closure since, get this, 2023, after the Rishi Sunak's administration pushed for greener production in its quest to reach net zero. I don't know if you remember Rishi Sunak. He was the last Conservative PM there. So the Conservative Party was pushing for this. Yeah, it's falling apart under the Labour Party, but both parties support this madness. But it's not madness from their point of view. What do you think net zero means? It means toppling a coal factory in Germany. It means shutting down a steel factory in the UK. What do you think the zero part of net zero means? Both of these stories, the coal factory detonated, the coal-fired blast furnaces going cold, that is a success if your way of looking at the world is net zero, it is incredible that the UK has only one steel mill left. That's where the Industrial Revolution was born. An island built out of coal was harnessed to make trains and ships and factories. It was amazing. It transformed the world. It improved the life of everyone on the planet. The Industrial Revolution was a British invention. But so was net zero, wasn't it? China already owns their last steel mill. Now they're shutting it down. Mark Carney approves. What do you think net zero means? What do you think transition means? Yeah, Germany's being shut down. The UK's being shut down. What do you think Mark Carney will do to us here? You cannot remilitarize if you deindustrialize. And when Anita Anand says she's going to build an auto industry, not without coal, you're not. Stay with us, more ahead. Well, one thing to know about Canada's new Prime Minister, and it's so weird to say that because he hasn't been elected by anyone. He doesn't have a seat in the House of Commons. The Liberal selection process was clearly compromised. 2/3 of the voters were disqualified from voting. The results were laughably improbable. I don't know if you saw this, but here's the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, meeting a group of automakers, and the way he introduces himself, I'm Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, because no one can really believe it. Everyone knows it's sort of a fake. He was injected, parachuted, carpetbagged. Here, take a quick look at that. It's so awkward. And look at their faces. They're thinking, who is this guy? Is he like an imposter or a Manchurian candidate or some sort of doppelganger? Take a quick look at this.
Can everyone hear me? Hopefully not. If you're lucky, you can't hear me. If you're unfortunate, you're close, you can hear me. Mark Carney, Prime Minister.
Well, I think the thing to know about Mark Carney is that he actually is very well known in his own circles, which just don't happen to be Canadian circles. He's well known in international circles, in NGO circles, and most importantly, in global warming circles. As you know, he's the co-chair until very recently of GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And net zero, it's sort of been thrown in the wastebasket in America, but boy, is it at work at the UK. They're closing their last steel plant there, which is the definition of net zero. Net zero is exactly what it sounds like. No more emissions, no more carbon. And you really can't make steel without emitting carbon because you can't make steel without burning coal. Let's check in with our favorite expert on the matters of carbon. And I'd love his point of view on Mark Carney and what he is besides the Prime Minister. No one really believes he's Prime Minister, but he has a long track record on other matters. I'm talking about Mark Morano, the head of ClimateDepot.com. He joins us now. Mark, great to see you again.
Thank you, Ezra. Happy to be here.
You know, I would not have thought that Mark Carney had a chance to become Prime Minister other than in this very brief interregnum, because the Conservatives were leading by 20 points until recently. But there's actually a chance that Mark Carney could win. The polls are showing it's pretty much all tied up. Now, I'm still optimistic, but maybe you can give our viewers a little bit of background. Put aside his Canadian political blah, 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 which we're covering pretty well. Tell us about him until last month. Like until last month, he didn't live in Canada. Until last month, he wasn't really a Canadian politician. He was an advisor behind the curtain or something. Who is Mark Carney? What don't Canadians know about him?
Well, I wrote about him in my book, The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. The simplest way to explain Mark Carney, there's two ways. One is meet the new boss for Canada, same as the old boss. He's Justin Trudeau 2.0, but here's the second and most important. He is a WFE, World Economic Forum, I guess you would say he's not a flunky of them or he's not a puppet of them. He's the guy pulling the strings.
Right.
And that's the difference between Justin Trudeau and him. You've got a very competent globalist, World Economic Forum person now in charge of Canada Whereas he's not going to take marching orders. This is the guy, Mark Carney's been used to giving marching orders. As the former governor of the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada, he was central, along with people like Larry Fink of BlackRock. And by the way, great interview with him in Davos this year, even though he didn't talk much. Central in installing environment, social governance, installing the Net Zero Banking Alliance. He has been at the forefront as the mastermind, if you will. And man, again, Mark Carney is the man who pulls the puppet strings. Justin Trudeau was the man who was pulled by the puppet strings. That's the difference of what Canada is getting here.
Tell me a little bit more about GFANZ. It's interesting to me. I didn't know until literally this week that the U.S. Congress has been investigating GFANZ. That's the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. That's Mark Carney's ESG group. They've been investigated. Thomas Massey is part of that investigation for collusion, for a cartel, for anti-market, anti-competitive forces in how they've basically threatened U.S. companies, including coal companies, how they've threatened ExxonMobil, who I thought no one can threaten ExxonMobil. They're the biggest company really in America. Tell me a little bit more about GFANZ. That's a phrase I had never heard in my life until a week ago. What should we know about GFANZ?
The Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Okay, if you go back, when Trump was first elected is when all of this became in earnest. This whole idea, we're not going to get it now internationally because Trump's going to be a roadblock in a large way, and we're also not going to get it in the United States. So we have to do this behind the scenes. And what Thomas Massey's doing is exactly spot on. They absolutely bypass democracy using the banking industry, the equity asset firms, and collusion between whether it's State Street and BlackRock and all the other equity assets and these central bank net zero alliances and the World Economic Forum and the United Nations coordinating. They essentially bypass democracy in every country by forcing behaviors. That was the phrase by Larry Fink, working with Mark Carney, working with all of these initiatives. And the behavior had the whole woke agenda, everything from transgender to critical race theory. But for the purposes of this conversation, most importantly, it was the climate issues. They didn't need Congress to pass a bill. They didn't need a president to do executive orders. They were forcing upon global and national businesses, whether in the US, Canada, their entire net zero ideology. In other words, these companies didn't get funded. Managers didn't get promoted. Managers couldn't even keep their jobs in some places unless they went along with this agenda. So it was a complete collusion, a racketeering enterprise where they were withholding the money to get the behavior they wanted, and they bragged about it openly. And if you look at, Mark Carney's history, his whole point was doing all of this behind the scenes, behind closed doors, working with the bankers. He didn't care what countries wanted, what voters wanted. And I think this is ripe for a massive investigation. It's massive fraud. It's massive collusion. And we have to make sure this kind of thing never happens again.
Thomas Massey's investigation happened last year. The report was issued by Republican congressional staff in December. And I know what I was doing in December. I was A, thinking about the Christmas break, but B, I was riveted by every single day Donald Trump had a new announcement, pronouncement, promise from Mar-a-Lago. So he wasn't president yet, but he was talking about tariffs and he was talking about Ukraine. He was talking about Israel and Gaza. So when the Republicans put out their paper on how GFANZ and several other groups committed anti-competitive acts, breaking the law by threatening energy companies, I missed it. And I think a lot of the world, which would you rather do? Pay attention to Donald Trump's hot tweets or read some report by congressional staff about GFANZ? I still barely know what that is. And even when I say the words, I'm super bored. Like, it's so uninteresting. And I think that's on purpose. Yeah. Is there a chance that'll get any legs? Like, I think there's a chance that Mark Carney will be PM. I'd give that chance 33%. But he was literally deposed by Hill's staff. Like, this wasn't a congressional hearing where the congressmen were out front all making their blowhard speeches and there was a witness there for an hour. Mark Carney was fully deposed. There was a transcript of it. Like, it was a heavy-duty investigation into cartel activities. And the guy who they investigated might be our next prime minister. Technically, he's our prime minister right now.
Yeah, well, this is always gets into, first of all, issues of jurisdiction. Can a United States congressional authority really, put anything with teeth on someone like Mark Carney, who's essentially a globalist? His loyalty isn't to Canada. His loyalty is to the World Economic Forum and the whole net zero agenda. This is this is literally one of the handful of players around the world when you talk about the deep state. It is Mark Carney. I'm not that optimistic that he'll face any legal repercussions, but I think the more we get this known, the more, but I think part of it is what you're saying. It's too arcane for the average person to understand. But essentially what they need to understand, you need to use words like cartel, you need to use words like racketeering, because that's what these bankers colluded to do, led by Mark Carney. Again, as I half jokingly say, he doesn't just know where the bodies are buried. He helped bury them. He helped put them in the condition that they were ready to be buried. And I mean that in a philosophical sense, because he went after everywhere that put up resistance to any of this agenda. And that includes, again, transgender ideology, critical race, the climate agenda. They found out ways to bypass it, to collude, and to force this agenda on companies, on energy companies, on companies that they knew wasn't in their best interest, but they had no choice but to go along. And that's where Thomas Massey's investigation really shines. So, it's very difficult, Ezra, as you well know, to bring down these people. It's very difficult to even interview them or hold them even momentarily accountable. So I wouldn't put too much stock in anything immediately coming from the investigation, but the biggest thing is public awareness.
I keep thinking about what Donald Trump did to the president of the country of Colombia. Trump was sending a couple of planes full of deportees back to Colombia. The president of Colombia refused them landing rights, saying it's undignified for them to be on military planes. So Donald Trump, who was informed of this while on the golf course, said, all right, freeze all visa applications from the country of Colombia. Sanctions on the president and his family and his government. Like he turned on every single possible switch. And literally in less than an hour, the president of Colombia said, okay, I'll send my presidential plane for these deportees and we accept them. And then he went on some long poetic statement about how America is boring, but maybe Trump would have a beer with him. It was really weird. But my point is, Trump really focused on the individual guy and he rolled over. I feel like a lot of Trump's jabbing at Trudeau was a personal thing, and Trudeau's gone now. And I think Trump has toned it down maybe 20%. But here's what's interesting to me. Trump has not, as we speak, Trump has not yet spoken to the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney. And I'm starting to think that maybe he's not going to talk to him until the election is over. And on the one hand, that makes sense because maybe Mark Carney is not legitimate, doesn't have a mandate. Why should Donald Trump negotiate with a man with no mandate? On the other hand, maybe it's, I don't understand what's going on. It feels uncharted. What do you think?
It's a very good question. It's interesting because, I guess the conventional wisdom is, Donald Trump helped Justin Trudeau, helped the Liberal Party, helped Mark Carney by going after Canada, 51st state and all that, and I think helped the nationalist pride. So you think Mark Carney would be thanking Donald Trump? It's hard to say. I think Donald Trump, I'm not sure what he has in store. Also with going after Greenland, he went to acquire Greenland for the mineral rights and have a whole thing there, a whole issue with that. I don't know. I don't expect Carney and Trump to get along very well at all. I think there's going to be a natural hostility between them. Now, if after an election he does get a mandate and Carney is your next prime minister, that may change. But they may or may not talk before the election. But I do think that Donald Trump is keeping it at arm's length at the moment. I also think he's keeping a lot of allies at arm's length. Even my daughters are like, what's going on? Why is Trump fighting with all our allies? Well, what he's doing is he's trying to make an omelet, and you have to break a lot of eggs. And those eggs in this situation are old U.S. allies. Everything's being renegotiated, whether it's the terms of NATO when it comes to Ukraine. The best joke was after Zelensky met with Trump in the Oval Office, the joke was Vladimir Putin offered to mediate peace talks between the U.S. and Ukraine. So I think what he's doing is he's breaking the table everywhere, including with Canada. And I guess you guys are acutely aware of how that's gone. And then he's going to reset the table, hopefully to more favorable terms for the U.S. and that we can get along. And I think within 6 months or so, things are going to start being rapidly repaired. So if Carney is your next prime minister, I do expect much, much better relations with the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you one last question about net zero, because I've been riveted by what's happening in Germany and the UK lately. Just in passing, I made a tweet about Germany detonating its most modern coal-fired power plant after just 6 years to make way for some green plan. And I just, like the idea of detonating a 6-year-old factory that probably had a 50-year lifespan. It was so symbolic of so much of the suicide of the West. And then I saw, and that's related to net zero. And then I saw, I think the United Kingdom probably has the craziest net zero government in the world. And I'm not going to blame it on the Labour Party, because Boris Johnson, the alleged conservative prime minister, was net zero crazy. Like, I think that there was no politician in the world who was more obsessed with it than him. So you can't blame this on the Labour Party. I see that British Steel, which already is owned by China, which is sort of crazy to begin with, has announced it's shutting down the last, they call it virgin steel plant in the UK. So it's like making steel from scratch with blast furnaces, like not just reforming it or working with steel that someone else made. It's incredible to me that the place where the Industrial Revolution was born, an island made of coal, thank God, that's what fueled the Industrial Revolution, is now shutting down their but that is what net zero means. Give me your thoughts on the UK. Like, I'm blown away by it. And yet net zero is still considered sane policy. It's considered noble policy.
Yeah, if you go back, and you're absolutely right, it's nothing to do, it's a lot to do with the Labour Party, but the Conservative Party, Boris Johnson in 2019, as prime minister, sought and actively attempted to put cement into the remaining fracking wells left in the UK as a way of saying this is permanent. Our commitment to net zero is unwavering, very similar to what Germany did. Now, they actually ended up not doing it at that moment, but there's still talk of them doing it now. They want to cement those wells up as sort of a way. It's kind of like, I guess, a transgender person transitioning, getting the surgery, saying, there's no way I'm going back. Yeah. They're that committed to net zero. And what's interesting about it is in 2019, they did the UK fires report, which was this crazy, bonkers net zero report that said you need to regulate CO2 as a pollutant and regulate it similar to asbestos. Now, remember, we inhale oxygen, exhale CO2. And conservatives in the House of Lords debated, or House of Commons debated this actual bill. And they all said, well, of course we support net zero, but maybe this goes a little too far. They were talking about shutting airports. They were talking about meat restrictions, travel restrictions. And even the Conservative Party in England just couldn't bring themselves to attack this. They were just dancing around the edges. I don't have an explanation. I don't understand how Canada, now there's a bright spot with Nigel Farage. He seems like he finally gets it. He comes after maybe being debanked over his position on climate change by NatWest Bank in England. Has hardened up the opposition. So I do have hope that England, maybe at some point with their parliamentary system can get in a real climate skeptic and someone who's going to go against net zero, but we shall see. The Conservative Party has recently announced that they're abandoning net zero by some year. So it's the first step in their moment of clarity. So we'll see how the UK Conservatives go forward here.
It's just so crazy to me. At the same time, the UK and Germany are talking about we need to reindustrialize. We're going to build our militaries and take on Russia because America won't. Yeah. They're shutting. Try rebuilding your military without any steel. Good luck with that. Maybe China will make it for you. Just
a key point here, Ezra, is the more UK, Germany, and by the way, German voters spoke loudly. Their new prime minister mocked openly during the campaign all the climate pledges that the incumbent had. It's first time, and Germany was the climate leader in Europe. So if Germany can do it, there's hope for the rest of Europe. But the key I wanted to make is anytime wealthy Western industrialized nations shut down their fossil fuel, their steel industries, their fracking, their oil and gas wells, all that does is raise global emissions of carbon dioxide, because all it's going to do is outsource it to Russia, to India, to China, the Middle East, all these places without the environmental standards, not to mention human rights standards. So that's all it does. But it gives you an accounting trick where your country now has less emissions, but you're importing all those emissions. Those are off the books, so that's okay.
Right. Wow, what a strange time we're in. I hope we get some sanity back in Canada. I felt like we were really close to getting rid of Trudeau and putting in Pierre Poilievre. That's in jeopardy, but it's not done. That cake is not yet baked. So there's still time to turn it around. And I've got to think that I know some people find it comforting to have this authoritarian hand descend down. If you look at the polling, it's pretty much just boomers and seniors who like Mark Carney. Young people do not at all. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Mark, it's great to catch up. Sorry, last word to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, he did bring the carbon tax to zero, but he didn't abolish the carbon tax, which is the argument we've always made here in the U.S. No carbon tax ever, because once you allow a new tax by government, they can play around. You'll never get rid of any other tax. You've just added the authority. So even though he's brought it down to zero, of course, as you well know, the carbon tax still exists. I just wanted to say one thing. My headline this week, Donald Trump, according to Bloomberg, 82 actions across 20 government bodies in 52 days. They're calling it a climate onslaught. Years of climate action demolished in days by Trump. I bring that up to say maybe that can rub off on Canada.
You're right. If we want to be competitive, if we want to keep our trade with America, so many of the companies and industries in Canada are American, including GM and Ford. The oil sands are either American companies like Imperial Oil or companies with huge American investments, like the Canadian ones, Cenovus, for example. I think Trump is breaking everything. Some on purpose, most things on purpose, some not on purpose, because he wants to reset them. And I hope that when the dust settles, we benefit from that too, because right now it certainly feels chaotic. Great to see you, Mark. Thanks for keeping in touch.
Thank you, Ezra. Appreciate it.
There he is, Mark Morano, the boss of ClimateDepot.com. Stay with us. More ahead. Hello, my friends. Robert Kerr, 8818, writes, Carney should not be anywhere near political office in this country. He certainly hasn't ingratiated himself in front of the U.S. House Judiciary Committee. Potential antitrust violations are what the lawyer's deposition is all about. Yeah, I mean, that is a heavy-duty deposition. That's not just answering questions for half an hour in front of the TV cameras. That is a serious investigation. I'm sort of shocked it hasn't been reported on anywhere. Tammy Robinson says, I started wondering why Carney has an Irish citizenship. I remember years ago that Ireland, like Bermuda, is a tax haven. So I decided to dig. Carney's Brookfield is partnered with Oaktree. And as it turns out, Oaktree is registered in Ireland. There's so much of a tangled web there, and we've only begun to scratch the surface. TS says he's even more condescending than Trudeau. I did not think it possible. You know, I'm calling him Trudeau 2.0, smarter, harder working, more dangerous. Well, that's our show for today. Until tomorrow, on behalf of all of us here at Rebel World Headquarters, to you at home, good night, and keep fighting for freedom.